Chang, Chow, Chavez, David Chu, Kansan Chu, Cooley, Cooper, Dababne, Daly, Daly, Dodd, Eggman, Frazier, Gaines, Gallagher, Cristina Garcia, Eduardo Garcia, Gatto, Gibson, Gomez, Gonzalez, Gordon, Gray, Grove, Hadley, Harper, Hernandez, Holden, Irwin, Jones, Jones Sawyer, Kim, Lackey, Levine, Linder, Lopez, Lowe, Mainshine, Mathis, Mays, McCarty, Medina, Melendez, Mullen, Nazarian, Obernolte, O'Donnell, Olson, Patterson, Perea, Quirk, Rendon, Ridley Thomas, Rodriguez, Salas, Santiago, Steinorth, Stone, Thurmond, Ting, Wagner, Waldron, Weber, Wilk, Williams, Wood. Madam Speaker.
A quorum is present. Members, a quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. The day's prayer will be offered by Assembly Member Shirley Weber. Dr. Weber.
Let us pray. Lord, you told us and demonstrated to us in John 5:13 that greater love has no man than this, than to lie down one's life for his friend. Today we honor a man who demonstrated the greatest love, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who 60 years ago decided to change the trajectory of race relations in this country. And despite 350 years of lynchings, burnings, enslavement, and humiliation that resulted in African Americans living the American nightmare, Dr. King had the audacity and the unmitigated gall to simply have an American dream. And he paid the ultimate price for working to make his dream a reality. Lord, we honor Dr. King because he demonstrated that one person standing on your principles can change the world. That one person, despite the odds they face, having their hand in your hand is always a majority. And while he accomplished much, we realize that the task is unfinished, and thus it is our responsibilities as legislators to bring it to completion. As Dr. King Jr. boldly and resolutely faced the Jim Crow of his day, let us face our Jim Crow of persistent poverty, over-incarceration, racial profiling, gender bias, unequal education, limited opportunities, and yes, let us face our Fergusons. Instead of waiting for the public to lead us, let this House speak up and lead to form a better California. Let us do it with enthusiasm and confidence as King did, remembering the words of the song, I ain't no ways tired. I've come too far from where I started from, and nobody told me the road would be easy, but I don't believe you brought me this far just to leave me. Father, I don't believe you brought California this nation, this world, this far along the path towards justice and equality, simply to leave us. So we continue the work knowing that the arc of the moral universe is long and sometimes hard and difficult, but it always, with your assurance, bends towards justice. And the people said, amen.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. We ask our guests and visitors to remain standing and join us for the flag salute. Join Assembly Member Thurmond as he leads us in the pledge. Mr. Thurmond.
Mr. Speaker and members, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Monday, January 12, 2015. The Assembly met at 12 noon. Honorable Kevin Mullen, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, presiding. Chief Clerk E.
Mr. Holden moves. Ms. Waldron seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees, there are none. Messages from the Governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Moving to motions and resolutions, the absences for the day. For legislative business, Assemblymember Ridley Thomas and Assemblymember Kansen Chu. For personal business, Assemblymember Gibson. And for illness, Assemblymember Calderon. Moving to procedural motions, Mr. Holden, you are recognized for your motions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 118 to allow Assembly members Gallagher and Gonzalez to have guests and photographers on the floor today.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 to allow Speaker Atkins, Assembly members Alejo, Garcia, Gonzalez, Lopez, Jones-Sawyer, and Weber to speak on Adjourn in Memory today.
Without objection, the request is granted.
And Mr. Speaker, I further request unanimous consent to print the program, Speaker Atkins' remarks, and Governor Brown's remarks from the Governor's inauguration on January 5th, 2015, in the Assembly Daily Journal.
Without objection, such shall be the order. Members, we are moving to guest introductions. Assemblymember Gallagher, would you like to introduce your guests?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, members, I would just like to introduce my family is with me this morning, my wife Jana and my 3 children. Catherine, Maggie, and Kellen. And they're happy to be here this morning and as we honor a great man, Martin Luther King, Jr.
I understand Assemblywoman Melendez has some guests with us as well. Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I have 3 guests with me here today up in the gallery, all from the city of Menifee. We have Councilman Matt Leesmeyer, who's here newly elected. We have City Manager Rob Johnson. And for those of you who think that name ID bears no significance in an election, I present to you Councilman John Denver.
Members, if we could have your attention, we'll be moving to business on the daily file. Business on the daily file. File item number 1, ACR 5 by Assembly Member Joan Sawyer. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 5 by Assembly Member Joan Sawyer relative to Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Assembly Member Joan Sawyer, you may open on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today I rise on ACR 5 for the Martin Luther King birthday holiday. I rise today to pay tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose life is the perfect example of what true service means. A life that is recognized throughout the world as a symbol of peace and love. A life that did not stand by and go quietly into the night when injustice reared its ugly head. A life that inspired a nation to stand up and recognize that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. A life whose peace and nonviolence were the tools used to wipe out darkness and hatred. A life whose dream became the dream of millions of people who dared not dream. A life that hoped that one day we will not be judged by the color of our skin, but the content of our character. A life that would be sad today to know, or when he saw that the dream, his dream, our dream, was not fully achieved. A life that would grieve for the young, black, and unarmed men whose lives still doesn't seem to matter. A life that would wonder why the newsreels of protests are so similar to the protests of 50 years ago. A life that would spur us to remember that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. A life that will challenge us to renew our pledge of true service to those we serve in these chambers. A life that will demand that as we remember every third Monday of January as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, that we remember it as a day of service and sacrifice. A life that will renew us in the dream for this year, and we hope that one day we will get to the point where if just one of us can't breathe, that it suffocates all of us, and we cry out in one voice our collective dream of peace, love, and our humanity. I respectfully ask for your aye vote on this measure and ask that the roll be open for co-authors. Thank you.
Mr. Williams, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, members, as chair of the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus, I rise in strong support of ACR 5 to celebrate and honor the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. I want to speak for a moment of what Dr. King meant to me as a young person growing up that wanted things to be simple. For Dr. King not only changed the hearts of people who opposed him and opposed the civil rights movement and opposed justice for race relations, but like any good pastor, Dr. King changed the hearts of those that stood with him as well. For when I was a young man, like many people I'm sure today after the events in Ferguson and New York, I had a hard time believing in the ideals of this country. I had a hard time believing in it because the image that was presented to me of what America should be or was nothing like the reality that I knew in my life and nothing like the reality that I saw around me. But the words of Dr. King, talking about this country as a dream that is yet unfolding, talking about the inevitable march of justice, it made me realize that what America is something that we must make happen. The high ideals of this country, the thirst for justice, is not yet something that is, but something that will be if all of us take appropriate actions. In his words, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And we must straighten our backs and work for our freedom. For a man can't ride you unless your back is bent. Dr. King changed the face of America with his unwavering dedication and commitment to justice and equality for all. The civil rights era was a movement for many people who came together to fight against injustice against African Americans, but also against all communities of color. And it is not something just in history. It is something as relevant today as it was then. The journey towards equality is difficult, but the work of Dr. King shows that we can have progress. Although injustice continues to this very day, we must be diligent and continue the struggle. As servants of the public, let us make a commitment to furthering the work of Dr. King, not just celebrating it as a holiday. Please join me in voting aye for this important measure in honor of Dr. King's life and work.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Eggman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise as the chair of the LGBT caucus, also in support of ACR 5. Dr. Martin Luther King has been a longtime hero of mine. When I was a doctoral student in Portland, I was asked to teach a community organizing class. And as a doctoral student thinking about teaching a bunch of young master's students about how do you organize in a community, I could find no better place to look to than the template of the letter from the Birmingham jail that Dr. Martin Luther King wrote to his own fellow clergymen when he had taken direct action and people had wished he hadn't, had wished that he would be quiet, not bring so much attention, not stir up trouble. And that became the template for which I taught the entire class, because he really provided for the African American community, but for all communities, a way in which to put into action the values that we hold. He talked about, when you're going to organize a community, you have to think, how do people come together? How do they feel they're part of the same thing? And in his words, when we are caught in the inescapable network of mutuality, tied in that single garment of destiny, whatever affects one directly, affects all indirectly. Never again can we live within the narrow and provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives within the United States can never be considered an outside anywhere within its bounds. And that's the idea that he brought, that we are all part of this same thing. If we live in the same country, the same state, the same community, we are all bound by what happens to each person. He provided 4 basic steps when you're going to think about organizing something. 1, collect the facts to assess if injustice simply, does it occur? Is it real? Is there injustice? If you can say yes to that, then you try to negotiate peacefully. You try to negotiate. How can we change this? How can we engage with this to make things better for people? The third step then is self-purification. Are our people up for this task? Do we have the courage to stand in the face of the anger that's going to come? Not even from those on the outside, but from those within us ourselves. Do we have that strength? Are we disciplined? Are we ready? And then finally, the direct action. What is it that we're going to do? And so I offer you today that Dr. King's work is not done. He provided us a template for the work that needs to be done. And whether it's the African American community, whether it's Ferguson, whether it's a young couple of the same sex in Alabama who still can't marry, whether it's 5 immigrants who die in a fiery crash without documentation, we don't know who they are, whether it's any body of people who do not enjoy the same laws that bound this country, the same opportunities, then the work is not done. So I offer to all of us today to please vote for ACR 5. And remember, an unjust law is no law at all, and that we are all bound in that single garment of destiny, where we have responsibilities to each other, to our state, to our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eggman. Mr. Levine, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. On behalf of the Jewish Caucus, I rise today in support of ACR 5 to honor the leadership and public service of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Today, we live in a time when fears, tensions, and anxieties are high. It is important that we reflect on an American hero who was committed to protecting civil rights and achieving equality through public demonstration and peaceful means. Dr. King's philosophy was one of cooperation and determination. By working together, he taught us all that we can achieve tremendous success that benefits all of us. Dr. King loudly proclaimed to anyone who would listen that all of us, regardless of who we are or where we come from, are to be valued. He believed that we all have purpose and divine qualities of greatness. At the young age of 26, Dr. King worked on the Montgomery bus boycott, where Rosa Parks became the face of civil disobedience. 8 years later, he shared his dream with the world. Dr. King's words were a call to action that caused the soul of the nation to reflect upon itself. He caused us all to look in the mirror and to ask ourselves, in a nation that has declared all of us are created equal, how does one American have a set of rights and opportunities that are less than those of another? Reverend King stood for equality, justice, and freedom in the face of inequality, injustice, and segregation. In his short 39 years, his courage led him to risk everything, even his life, to fight inequalities. I am hopeful that we will continue to make more progress toward Dr. King's dream. As a community, as a state, as a nation, we must carry forward his work. Dr. King said that humankind must evolve for all human conflict, a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. I thank Mr. Jones Sawyer for this important resolution.
Mr. Alejo, you are recognized.
Thank you, colleagues. On behalf of all of my Latino caucus colleagues, we also stand in solidarity, celebrating these next few days, celebrating the hard work and the dream of one of our greatest Americans that changed the history of our country. But when we talk about Dr. King, we also have to remember the many other courageous people who stood with him. You just have to look at documentaries such as Eyes on the Prize, where you look back at the many courageous young people, adults, who stood and faced brutality. People were thrown bricks at, dogs were unleashed, water hoses were released against many courageous people who sacrificed so we could have the civil rights that we enjoy today. And that work inspired so many other communities across our country. But this year, in August, we celebrate a 50th anniversary of one of the most important landmarks, milestones in American history, the Voting Rights of 1965, that struck down many discriminatory electoral systems that disenfranchised communities of color, first throughout the South, but then yet later it was extended to uplift and uphold equal protection under the law for even Latino voters and candidates. Many of us are here in office today because of those historic pieces of legislation that Dr. King and so many others fought for. But as I look across the room today, and I'm looking at probably one of the most diverse legislatures in the country here in Sacramento, that it's not enough for us just to be here. It's not enough for us just to honor Dr. King through ACR 5. The more important work that we can do is what we do here week after week, month after month, when we start considering policies to address poverty, the over-incarceration of young African Americans and Latinos that fill up our state prisons, when we talk about inadequate schools and overcrowded school conditions. That's how we really honor the dream of Dr. King and moving California forward, so we address those issues that still remain many decades later after Dr. King left us. So as we go home to our districts, let's carry out those dreams. Let's not just do resolutions, but really look at ourselves and the votes that we take here to keep his dream alive.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Ms. Waldron, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we contemplate a great man's life and legacy who didn't fight with violence, we as a society need to communicate more but not harshly. And follow his example. We need to get together, figure out what to do, how to do it, work together, and love more. As many of you know, I grew up in the South Bronx in a poor neighborhood. We were all immigrants there, kind of what they call the melting pot. Folks came from Puerto Rico, they came from Africa, Jamaica, Cuba, Italy, Ireland. We all were together. You know, we were young kids. We played together. Race was never anything in our minds. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech was before my time, but I believe that we felt the positive impact of it in our poor immigrant neighborhood. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read, permission to read?
Without objection.
Thank you. President Ronald Reagan signed into law this national holiday that we celebrate, recognizing Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday back in 1983. And I'd like to just close with this quote. At the bill signing, this is what the president said. In his own life's example, Dr. King symbolized what was right about America, what was noblest and best, what human beings have pursued since the beginning of history. He loved unconditionally. He was in constant pursuit of truth. When he discovered it, he embraced it. His nonviolent campaigns brought about redemption, reconciliation, and justice. He taught us that only peaceful means can bring about peaceful ends, and that our goal was to create the love community. America is a more democratic nation, a more just nation, a more peaceful nation, because Martin Luther King Jr. became her preeminent nonviolent commander.